Today I'm joined by my new colleague Simon Bøge. So welcome, Simon.
Thank you.
We've written a paper on how to get the most out of your existing customers. Very interesting topic and very timely, I think, for a lot of companies. But maybe just a quick introduction to yourself, Simon, before we jump into that topic. Welcome to Courant.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so as Mikkel's indicating, I started fairly recently, and we jumped on this project together over the past month here. So my background is in consulting, 22 years in working with businesses on commercial development, strategy, turnarounds in multiple industries, but a lot obviously for companies that this would be relevant for. So I agree with you. I think it's timely for many businesses.
Yes, because I think a lot of airtime and focus and attention and resources goes to winning logos in a lot of organizations. Also a lot of praise, right? For good reasons. But in this sort of economic environment and with a lot of the things going on in the world, I think a general very high level observation on my side, at least, and that also triggered the paper that we did, is that a lot of B2B companies, especially sort of in the complex domain where a few customers make up a big part of revenue and maybe typically also a bigger part of profits, in those companies, there's a bit of a lack of discipline and deliberateness about how they treat their existing customers in order to get the most value out of them. Yeah. So that's of course is a general observation. But to your point, Simon, why do you think this is a special topic that needs more attention that it typically gets in B2B organizations?
Yeah, so I think my perspective on that is, in the market we're in now, you have two major dynamics, at least in my mind, that I think about. One is sort of global political unrest, which challenges supply chains, puts pressure on raw material prices, creates a general uncertainty about future commercial opportunities for companies, right? And so that's the one thing companies have to deal with right now. And then on top of that, you put like the AI wave that brings, in my mind right now, probably more confusion than benefit to some extent, right? Especially in commercial organizations. I mean, you have tons of opportunity, but at the same time, you've been, for B2B companies sometimes, working in the same way for the past 50 years, right? So where do you go from now? And so if you take those things and you have a market where you're fighting for each deal.
Yeah. Investment ability and interest is a bit down, maybe.
Exactly.
So I mean, risk appetite a bit down. So
people are cautious. Some may experience increasing sales because people are increasing inventories due to the uncertainty. But I think for most companies, they either can't price the raw material price increases fast enough into the market, so they hit on margin, or they're seeing demand plummet. Right? Yes. And so for those types of businesses, I think the deliberateness of your commercial strategy is extremely important.
And in that sense, with those things going on, what's right in front of you? Where do you have immediate access and a lot of data? That's actually on the existing customers.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, right, so you talk about focus on capturing demand, generating pipeline through new logos, but then you have the existing customers as what we call the gold mine. What is the unrealized potential and some of the issues that you see when we talk existing customers, where you have an existing sort of business relationship?
Yeah. So I think for the existing customers, the lack of understanding of who has which potential, who's getting what prices, what service level is appropriate for each type of customer is really some of the the things that we're seeing in the market right now in companies where it becomes sort of to some extent sometimes a one-size-fits-all approach to the customers. And I think that leaves money on the table to a far extent, either by giving away margin or by not grabbing the potential of the customer.
Yeah, I think that's one of the bigger ones. So we've also in this respect also worked with sort of price realization programs and so on, where it can very quickly become quite defensive in the sense that, we're looking at capturing more of the value that we're generating, but we don't want to push customers away. But there's also something about being sort of aware of the actual value you're delivering and taking your fair share of that value, right?
Exactly.
And if you just leave it to the front line or don't have a clear map of where is the potential, what's your sort of leverage against that potential and all these things, you're kind of left with gut feel subjectivity of the individual rep, right? For example, that's where it kind of lands, right, in how they treat their customers or the small account universe that they are in charge of, right?
Yeah, and I think I think it's all connected, and in defense of sort of sales organizations, because I've been on the floor myself, I've seen this, and when the market tightens. And we start talking about cost cutting, so you may even have less resources to do sales and marketing. The go-to becomes, of course, an interest in closing deals, and that puts pressure on price oftentimes, right? Yeah. And so I think this is also largely, a management, something management needs to be aware of is do you give your commercial organization the comfort to conduct their commercial choices in the right way?
Yeah. And I think what's interesting when you dive into some of the analytics, when we've done these audits of existing customers and what are we charging whom or how do we service different types of customers, I think two patterns, and I see it's surprisingly sort of repeatable. One thing is, if you're a certain type of B2B companies, keep in mind that it's not all B2B companies that operate like this, but for a certain type of B2B company, a pretty small share of your client sort of contribute with the sort of a lion's share of your profit pool. So a few clients bring in actually an outsized sort of profit. So that's one observation. Another observation is on the pricing piece. You look at what are you actually charging for exactly the same product. And a very basic thing is to look at that, and there is surprisingly high variance. So you cannot even it's not about sort of trying to get around. It's different things they're getting. It's exactly the same line item, but the price is all over the place.
Yeah, the price or the service level they're getting, or shipments or other benefits that you're sort of giving away to close the deal right now.
And maybe that's one of the things is it's not about, it might be right, who knows, but it's the deliberateness and a little bit of a strategic approach to how to handle all the gifts you have, how to price for leverage or price for value in a world where you have quite a lot of customers, and if you just keep giving things away, you're leaving a lot of value on the table, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a core problem of many of the firms that we're either working with or chatting with these days is the lack of insight in your customer base. As sort of a foundational thing, I met with a firm this morning who in their commercial organization doesn't have a view on the value of their pipeline. So the value of customer transactions in their pipeline. And so, it's if you don't know either, the value is one thing, but the potential of your customers, then you're bound to make wrong decisions.
Yeah.
And so, it's the equivalent, it's the analogy of saying, I have of an airline, you have a business customer, you have transactional data on them for the past 20 years. They fly every freaking week, right? And so you put them in business class and give them a meal and treat them nice, and then you have a young professional who comes into the airline who might have bought like an economy ticket and sits in economy. You don't have any transactional history on this person, and you don't know the potential. He may fly every week for the next 20 years. But you're asking him to pay euros for a coffee, and you sit him in economy class. And so that customer's lifetime value is going to be extremely high. But if
you
you don't
see
know
it in the
that,
data, no.
yeah, exactly, right.
And it's an interesting thing. I think another thing, one of the symptoms of lack of discipline and deliberateness is something I've seen at least is that you just, if you look at your sort of the distribution of customers, you kind of just cut it in slices, and then you just distribute them among your sales force, and then each of them has 80 or 100 customers. Some of them might be extremely big, some of them being extremely small, some of them have high potential, some of them have low potential. So what you actually do not control though is how do the reps actually spend their time across this distribution of customers, right? And one of the, I think, most sort of a very sort of clean move you can do is to look at different engagement models, for example. So assigning ownership of these accounts or moving ownership of these accounts. And there's a lot of different ways to do it, but having the clarity and the right diagnosis to make a deliberate choice about how to handle, who to own accounts and whatnot can also be a big unlock, as opposed to just sort of leaving it on the individual rep to figure out how to spend their time with this very diverse distribution of customers. Right?
Yeah, I mean, you also miss the specialization of a sales rep in that respect, and I think maybe one final symptom is, and I think you're alluding to it, Mikkel, is the lack of transparency on sort of what we would call the full cost, profitability of a customer. Because oftentimes we only look at sort of the landed cost of a transaction, which does not include services and freight and other things that actually cost us a lot of money, samples and all those kind of things. And so I think to be as deliberate as what we're saying is you need to have a certain level of transparency on your customer base to really do that.
And maybe that's the bridge, Simon, because in the paper we outline sort of 6 levers. Okay. I get it. I'm a type of company where the lifetime value of my clients is high. I have a lot of repeat buying, or I'm a subscription business where it makes sense to be a little bit strategic and deliberate about existing customers. I'm that type of business. I'm seeing some of these symptoms that you're alluding to. So where do I go from here? And I think one of the things we said, at least a very sort of obvious immediate lever is to get a view of the baseline. So a really, really strong fact-based view about what's going on. How are we pricing the different types of customers? How does the customer distribution look in terms of contribution margin, factoring in the sort of total cost picture? What's the potential or the economic upside of different clients? Again, to your point, if we don't have that, we tend to just gravitate towards big clients, but a big client is not necessarily a high potential client. So a first thing is to get that full end-to-end view on what's actually going on here. And I think that alone triggers a lot of introspection and interesting discussions. But again, it's also quite rare that companies actually have this full view, at least in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's worth the investment. I've had clients where I spent 3 months doing sort of a full data load on the customer base. I've had customers where I spent 2 years on it. I think common for both types of clients is that the commercial initiatives that they start, the way they organize themselves, the prices they're setting, the level of service, the SLAs that they're forming with their customers are much more profitable once you have that overview. So I think as a firm, you really need to create some level of that base at some point if you really want to make sure to wring out all the value of your existing customer base.
Yeah, because what you can layer on top of that, the second level to that point is to layer on top a much more fact-based segmentation model. And I think that's one of the cornerstones of managing sort of a value when it comes to handling your existing clients, right? That segmentation model, and you can just kind of laugh at it like a 2x2 or whatever it is, but it's just an extremely important compass, right? When it comes to mapping out all the things that we want to give or charge for or price, all the things that will flow into the mix. What is your experience with building sort of a segmentation model?
I've done segmentation multiple times, probably on the wrong side of 20 times with firms, and they do.
What makes the good ones good and the bad ones bad?
But I think what makes the good ones good is that you actually use them.
Yeah.
Right. And I would rather have a firm that has 4 segments in 2x2 that actually adhere to them.
Yeah.
And everybody uses them. Then I would have a very complex.
Yeah, your analytical mind would say that's too crude. We cannot. But
exactly.
But it kind of works.
It's much easier to work with. I mean, we've also had clients where we work on psychographics and demographics, and you do behavioral segmentation, and we have all kinds of bells and whistles. And I think in the B2C space, I think that does have its right. I think in the B2B space, that's way too complicated. And so for me, I think actually making sure we use that. And that's where this whole account management of field sales portfolio review is interesting, because once you do the segmentation and then you graph out and say who actually has what kind of customers, you do get surprised. I mean, you'll have a field rep who has 100 customers who are all sort of in a growth segment, so customers we don't have a lot of share of wallet with.
So probably a lot of those would be underserved because
exactly,
and he or she is.
And then you figure out this guy or girl may not even be the right profile to hunt those types of, and that's another thing, right? You need to put your best man or woman forward on the type of customers you have. So I think making sure you have the segmentation, but also really using it, I think is the secret here.
And then I think my experience is also making it a dynamic tool that lives in how you run your commercial organization. Dynamic in the sense that you're constantly recalibrating or reclassifying accounts against the framework, 1. 2, making sure it's actually lands in the organization, whether it's a CRM system or your commercial management model, using to steering or how you allocate resources, incentives, all the stuff that flows from a proper segmentation model.
Yeah, and I think doing segmentation, and I mean, this is something that anybody who's worked in commercial operations will, probably remember having done at some point. But, I want to make a case for the simplicity of things again. I've had clients where, especially in sort of more technical types of businesses, where you spent a lot of time and you build almost like algorithms to define which segment a customer belongs in, right? And then everybody finally agrees that this is the right segmentation, but then once you get to the point where you need to use it, that's the difficult part, right?
I very much agree.
So I mean, rather,
So check your smarty pants when you're doing a segmentation.
I think a little bit,
Something I'm very excited about, Simon, in the back of a segmentation model, which I really think is the foundation for everything we'll talk about for now. So yes, you can call it's just a 2x2, but it's doing it in a proper way, and landing an organization extremely important. But that aside, that's on the engagement piece. So matching different engagement models to the segmentation model. I think that's a very natural marriage and a very, very powerful change lever. At least, for example, we work with a software company where we ran the whole diagnostic of the customer base, found out that the long tail of customers, I think close to 70% of all accounts, only made up around 30% of value and had very low potential. We had a potential scoring us also. But they were all sort of mixed in with the bigger accounts. So the account managers managing both types of accounts. And a very deliberate move for that company was to actually take away the ownership of those 70% of all accounts. Ooh, scary, right? And then move them to a more support-led and marketing-led ownership model, right? Because what happens when you just throw those into the mix in the old way is they take up a lot of time, actually. They have very low potential. They might be poor fit customers, actually, right? So that is a sort of a bold move, but a very simple sort of move, but can make a massive difference, because what it also does is, of course, it liberates a lot of time for your key reps to work the big, juicy, high potential accounts. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think for me, I've had clients in different situations, and I think depending on the situation of the client, you want to do different things once you have this transparency on your customer base. So one client would be massive market potential, tons of customers we haven't yet grown sufficiently with our share of wallet. There you're going to want to do exactly as you described. I mean, take smaller, low profitability customers into a different service model where it becomes profitable.
Yes.
Simply to free up time for your account managers or field sales to actually spend time on them.
And lower cost of service or cost of sales too.
Exactly. And then you have other firms where it's simply mature, you know. So and so the way they grow is by going further and further down into the market and grabbing smaller and smaller customers.
Yes.
And so here you want to think about maybe, you know, do you have the right size of sales organization? And do you even want to service those smaller types of customers? I mean, does it fit with your model, and can you build the model to fit, right? So it depends a little bit on the situation.
So there's a lot of interesting discussions here. Do we sort of all price ourselves out of a certain segment? You know, it's kind of like a slow-moving divorce, right? In a way.
Exactly. So but I agree with you, and that's where this whole AI wave that's flooding in now becomes interesting for us, and for organizations in general is, you know, if you have identified a tail of customers that are, if not low profitability, but maybe even unprofitable, once you start loading cost in, or sort of understanding what kind of services we're providing them, then the tech touch that I know you like to call it, Mikkel, handling model or engagement model for those type of customers becomes quite interesting, because AI can do a lot for us.
Yeah, totally trigger-based, fully automated. It's no human intervention almost. And to that point, I think it's pretty interesting to look at sort of the profit profile of different clients. I think we also did a diagnostic piece where I think it was more than 60% or 70% of all clients that were actually unprofitable, right? So you get quite surprised when you, to your point, load in all the cost, and it's a very big sort of task, but it's something that's rarely done. And once you do it, it can be quite enlightening.
Yeah.
Maybe flowing from that, Simon, is also the whole pricing piece, because one thing is cost to serve. What do our reps spend their time on? You know, another thing, which I was kind of surprised going into pricing and looking at some of these diagnostics, is how big a variance there is, for example, on the same product, as we talked about before. How do you use pricing in the context of customer and value management as a discipline, and what's going on?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the big ticket items for me, at least if you're time constrained as a firm. I think pricing is for sure one of the levers you're going to want to use to get benefit from your existing customer portfolio and future business, obviously, as well. But I think, you know, the way to drive out, I mean, there are multiple advantages of doing these prices diagnoses, as you say. I mean, once you have the fully loaded cost, you're starting to understand what we would call revenue leakage part of things, which is, where do we give things away for free, basically, that we shouldn't do, which effectively lands our realized price at either a negative level or at too low levels. And so that's the one thing. The other one, which I think is also interesting in these times where you want to give your sales organization more comfort and confidence, is understanding how once you see customers that we should have the same leverage with, so pricing leverage, they're the same type of firm, they buy the same amount from us, they have the same level of switching costs,
concentration of suppliers,
those type of things, is what are the outliers? Because what happens over time with pricing is that you get pressed for driving revenue like you do these years. You give a discount, and the next year the discount is the anchor.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So it chips away. Yeah.
It kind of chips away and drift from what should be the price. And so once you start identifying these outliers, you can tell, you have the discussion with your sales organization and the seller with the customer in saying, look,
here's a false repricing, basically.
Everybody else at this level is doing business with us at this price, and that's the price. And so that's one of the other things about pricing that you know, that both help the organization, but also obviously drive some revenue. And
good point. Another thing that I think is also overvalued or undervalued, that's a little bit more on the sort of when you start to work with bigger accounts, Simon, right? Where, I don't know how many times I've seen companies aiming to implement proper account management models where we have a structured, deliberate approach to keeping and developing accounts. Often it kind of, someone does some sort of deck and this is our methodology and then nobody follows it. But I've also seen when you actually succeed, which is, I think there was a study at some point with like 20 or 30% of companies that want to do it actually succeed with it. But when they do it, really hardwiring a very, very sort of firm account management model, especially for these sort of high value, high potential clients, how impactful it can be to be deliberate about how you develop clients, how you invest. When you bring in your CEO, how you do forward planning together with the clients, all the privileges that comes with being an important account. So codifying really that cadence, both externally, but also you might say internally. So how do you manage your portfolio of accounts? How do you manage the conversations? How do you do deal strategizing in the relationship between sales managers and the normal reps, so to say, right? So I think getting deliberate about this operating cadence in a sales organization, back to the engagement model, segmentation model, all these things, extremely powerful as well. Back to building discipline and habit, right?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think some of the best CCOs and sort of sales managers I've come across in my career are people who like sort of the ongoing cadence and crunch time and the Friday meetings and the monthly calls, and are sort of, they are constant in their behavior.
Yeah.
Right. So they don't, one year we do it this way, the next year we do it another way, but people who insist this is the way we do, and these are the questions we ask ourselves.
Yes.
And they continue year after year doing the same thing, because I mean, I think we're all creatures of habit.
Yeah.
And so if we're in an organization, once we've seen things many times, it becomes second nature and we stop thinking about it. And that's when we really begin to perform. But if you change pattern all the time, I do agree with you. It becomes less efficient.
And that's a big part, of course, running a commercial, but even more important when you also, again, trying to direct sort of your barrel towards the right high potential clients and whatnot. I just want to introduce the sixth lever, which is building really on what you said before, Simon. What's unique about existing clients typically is you have quite a lot of data on these clients, whether it's transactional data, relationship, different types of engagement data. There's a lot of stuff typically coming in from your historic relationship, and a way to get the most out of that data is to build sort of a data-driven engine where you run some certain types of plays, right? It might be different types of marketing-owned or outreach-owned plays where you use the data, the signals, to trigger some sort of interaction, right? That again aims to deliver on some sort of outcome. And there can be many things, but everything from churn prevention to upselling to cross-selling to building advocates. There's so many different scenarios under the sun. You have data, you have AI capabilities now allowing you to do a lot of things at scale that also feels personalized, for example, right? Okay, totally. And then different types of digital technologies that allows you to engage virtually with customers. So data-driven plays, be it the humans reaching out or it's fully automated, also is a big opportunity space in this universe of getting the most out of your existing clients.
Absolutely.
So that was kind of 6 levers, right? We talked a little bit about the potential, why it's important right now with pipelines maybe being a bit more difficult, and investment in getting new clients a bit difficult. So get the most out of your existing clients. Some of the things going on in terms of the symptoms of how you are managing your clients, not necessarily in the best possible way, all the way to some of the levers you can pull. When it comes to driving this as a transformation, Simon, I see the symptoms, I see the potential, I like the inspiration brought about in the case of these levers, what do I do now? What would kind of be your advice in terms of where do I get started?
I think my first and most fundamental advice would be that this is not a project that ends tomorrow. I mean, it's a journey, and you're going to have to perceive it as such. I mean, at the end of the day, despite AI and other things, we're working with people, between people here. And so the changes and things that we're talking about here to really drive out value are things that needs to happen through people. And so I think, whether you start in one corner and work your way over, or you do the full thing, you need to understand that this will continue. And so I think installing in your organization an understanding that change is part of the way we operate. Is a super important part of any commercial improvement. And then I think it's a question of also, depending on the situation of the firm, is understanding what comes first. And I like to say, I mean, when we do work with clients, I mean, find some quick wins, find some things where you can gain some quick success, either showcasing that a model works or grab some value from the market. It can be through pricing, for instance, is typically a good short-term initiative to start with that can also fund the journey ahead, and then maybe take some of the longer term stuff, reimagining your commercial operating model, which can take longer, and it can include digitization and other things. Take that on the backside of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think another thing I've also seen is if you're really changing engagement models, you're reassigning account ownership, you're building up a new sort of fully digital way of engaging, and all the things that comes from these types of considerations, is also to grow a bit into it, right? It can be easy to do the slides, but how do you actually make it stick, right? So all the way down from trying to pilot some of it, build some success stories, get ambassadorship in the organization, build on those experiences to bring on the rest of the business. So there's quite a lot of different change levers you can use to make sure that this actually sticks. Because that is, of course, one of the risks here is that the discipline and the deliberateness we're trying to build drifts, right? To a point about how do you operate, how do you engage, how do you invest your time, all the things that goes into the mix here. Keeping the discipline in how you manage your customers is the biggest. It's really the biggest win, but it's also the biggest pitfall that we simply drift away from whatever we all agreed on, and then we go back to doing what we did, or something changes and we slip back into the old model, so to say.
I think to that point, I fully agree. I think the way to prevent slipping back, and once you want to do a new model and you define new principles and an operating model and things, I mean, you have to think about incentives. You cannot get around incentives. I mean, I've been in cases where we've done a new operating model, a new way of working with customers, focus on big customers, increase our share of wallet, and business plan was ready, and everybody agreed that this was the right thing. But management didn't want to touch incentives. And the issue is then if your sales force is incentivized to close a budget at the end of the month still, I mean, what's their incentive to follow the playbook and actually focus on the big customers, right?
Yes.
And so I think incentives is extremely important as one of the hygiene factors. I think another thing, because a lot of these things that we do, whether it be pricing or it be new account structures or it be a new pipeline management system, whatever it is, that is part of a new target operating model, that will require sales organizations to work a lot more with data and documentation. And so I think having a sense for let's call it the UX of the sales organization. So how can we actually make their life? What is the experience they have here? How can we make their lives easier and free up their time to focus on what actually drives value? Rather than burdening them with, you need to fill out 15 different fields in CRM now every time you've had a meeting. I mean, that's definitely not going to help them, right? So that's another thing I think is extremely important. So there are some of those details that you kind of need to get in there as well.
What about planning for some of the political pieces here, Simon? Because that's kind of hot potato, right? You talked about incentive models, and the executive didn't want to touch that for good reasons, because that can be a really hot potato, right? In the same vein, taking away revenue or budget or account ownership from certain people, moving into a global team or to even e-commerce and all these things, that also brings a bit of political tension. How can you sort of plan and mitigate for that? There's no easy answer here, but it's part of the deal, right? So ignoring it is probably not the right way to go about it, right?
I mean, I think there is a multitude of things that you want to do, and I think you and I have both tried everything. And I think the best cases, the most successful commercial transformations that I've done, they're fully supported by top management. They have an understanding and transparency of the value we're chasing. So an understanding of what is the business case of doing the changes that we are talking about here. Be it, what is the value of spending more time on big customers, spending more time on growth customers, serving smaller customers in a more lean setup. I mean, what are the values out of that? Being very, very clear on that, both in management, but also in either regions or in divisions, understanding what it is it actually we're going for here and why. I think that's another thing. And then the final thing I will say is involvement. I mean, I've never seen a commercial transformation project solely sitting in an ivory tower in headquarters work, to be completely honest, right? So I think if you don't involve your regions or your divisions and sort of the local sales teams, you're not gonna succeed. And also it's not the right way to go about it, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who need to live the model, right?
So they should have a say in designing it as well. Good stuff, Simon. I think that's kind of the closing note. So kind of, again, summing it up, a lot of potential, often a bit of a lack of discipline or deliberateness, and also visibility in terms of the potential of our existing customer base. A lot of things you can actually do, but it's a transformation. So it takes time, it takes deliberateness, it takes structure, and a bit of patience maybe as well on top of that. So thank you for joining the podcast, Simon, and great having you in France.
Thank you, and loving to be here.
Good stuff. See you.